The moment my wife Cambria laughed at Porter's bedroom joke, I knew my marriage was over. Not because of the joke itself, though comparing my stamina to a microwave timer was particularly creative, but because of how she threw her head back and touched his arm like they were sharing some private moment at our anniversary dinner. "Oh, Porter, you're terrible," she giggled, her manicured fingers lingering on his expensive suit sleeve. "But honestly, I tell him everything. If you don't like it, Darren, you can always go home." The silence at our table stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Mason, my best friend and business partner, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Eileen, Cambria's supposed best friend, suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. The other couples at our table, friends we'd known for years, studied their plates like they contained the secrets of the universe. I run a tech repair shop in downtown Dallas. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps me busy. Cambria works in upper management at Keller Marketing, Porter's company. She makes twice what I do, drives a BMW, and never lets me forget either fact. "You know what, Cam?" I said, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my chest. "I think I will go home." I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and dropped enough cash on the table to cover my meal. "Enjoy your evening, everyone, really. Sounds like the party's just getting started." Porter smirked. "Aw, come on, Darren. Can't take a little ribbing between friends?" Friends. Right. This from the guy who'd been circling my wife like a shark for the past 6 months, ever since she started working late 3 nights a week and coming home smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. "Between friends?" I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. "Yeah, Porter. I'm learning a lot about friendship tonight." As I walked toward the exit, I caught fragments of whispered conversation behind me. Cambria's voice, sharp with embarrassment. "He's so sensitive lately." Porter's deeper tone, probably playing the concerned boss. The whole thing made my stomach turn. In the parking lot, I called Mason. "Dude, where'd you go?" He answered on the first ring. "Home." "And Mason, remember that conversation we had last month about being prepared for anything?" A pause. "Yeah, I remember. It's starting." I hung up and drove home to our house in Preston Hollow, Cambria's dream home, with its perfect landscaping and mortgage that made my accountant weep. Inside, I went straight to my office and opened the safe behind my desk. Most people keep important documents in safe deposit boxes. I keep mine at home, where I can access them anytime. The manila folder was thick with printed emails, bank statements, and photographs. The USB drive contained digital copies of everything, plus some interesting audio recordings from Cambria's phone that she didn't know I'd backed up to our shared cloud account. Call it paranoia, but when you grow up in a house where your parents screamed at each other every night before their spectacular divorce, you learn to document everything. The folder's label read, "Cambria's Playbook," in my neat handwriting. Inside was 2 years' worth of evidence that my wife had been planning this humiliation for longer than I'd realized. Screenshots of text messages to Eileen about how boring I was. Emails to her sister about Porter being everything Darren isn't. Bank statements showing mysterious cash withdrawals that coincided with her girls' nights out. But the real treasure was buried deeper in the digital files. Cambria thought she was clever, using her work computer for personal business. What she didn't know was that I'd been the IT consultant who'd set up their entire network security system 2 years ago. I still had administrative access to everything. You don't grow up in a snake pit without learning to collect venom. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff Cambria bought for impressing clients, and started reading. By the time she stumbled home at 2 a.m, reeking of wine and Porter's cologne, I was ready for war. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Cambria tried to gaslight me the next morning. She stood in our kitchen, perfectly dressed for another day of corporate ladder climbing, sipping coffee from her favorite mug while acting like nothing had happened. "You embarrassed me last night," she said without looking up from her phone, running off like a child just because Porter made a harmless joke. "Harmless," I repeated, buttering my toast with deliberate calm. "Is that what we're calling it?" "You're being paranoid, Darren. Porter's my boss. We have to maintain a professional relationship." Professional? I almost laughed. The text messages on my computer upstairs painted a very different picture of their professional relationship. Messages like, "Can't wait to feel your hands on me again," and "Darren's working late tonight, wanna come over," weren't exactly standard corporate communication. "Right," I said. "Professional." She finally looked at me, her green eyes cold. "I don't like your tone." "And I don't like being made a fool of in public. Guess we're both having a rough morning." After she left for work, I called Mason. He arrived at my shop 20 minutes later with coffee and donuts, ready for what we'd started calling Operation Boomerang. Mason's an ex-Army communications specialist who now helps me with the more technical aspects of my repair business. He's also the most loyal friend a guy could ask for, which is why I'd trusted him with the details of my situation months ago. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. I opened my laptop and showed him the files. "We start small, a little embarrassment to test the waters." The first leak was simple, an audio recording of Cambria and her work friends at their monthly ladies' lunch, where she'd spent 20 minutes detailing my supposed shortcomings as a husband. I'd found it on her phone's voice memo app. Apparently, she'd been recording these sessions to share with Porter later. I edited out the identifying background noise and sent it anonymously to the company's general Slack channel with the message, "Thought you might find this interesting workplace gossip." The reaction was swift. By noon, Cambria was calling me, her voice tight with panic. "Someone leaked a recording of me talking to the girls. HR wants to see me this afternoon." "That's terrible," I said, not bothering to hide my satisfaction. "Any idea who might have done such a thing?" "This isn't funny, Darren. My job could be in jeopardy." "Maybe you shouldn't have been talking about your personal life at work." She hung up on me. But Cambria wasn't going down without a fight. By 3 o'clock, I had a visit from 2 police officers asking about irregularities in my business accounts. Apparently someone had reported that I'd been embezzling money from client repairs. The accusation was ridiculous. I keep meticulous records, and every transaction is documented. But it was also clever. Cambria knew that even a false accusation would damage my reputation in our tight-knit community. After the officers left, satisfied that my books were clean, I realized my wife had just escalated our private war into something much more serious. She'd tried to destroy my livelihood over a simple embarrassment. That's when I decided to show her what real escalation looked like. I drove to her office building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in downtown Dallas. The lobby was all marble and modern art, designed to intimidate. The security guard recognized me from previous visits and waved me through to the elevators. Cambria's office was on the 15th floor, in a corner suite that overlooked the city. I found her door open, and she was inside with Porter, their heads bent over some documents on her desk. They were standing close enough that I could smell his cologne from the doorway. "Working hard?" I asked. They jumped apart like teenagers caught making out. Porter straightened his tie, trying to look professional. Cambria's face flushed red. "Darren, what are you doing here?" "Thought I'd stop by and see how my wife's day was going. You know, after that unfortunate business with HR." Porter cleared his throat. "Maybe I should give you two some privacy." "No, stay," I said, stepping into the office and closing the door behind me. "This concerns you too." I walked over to Porter's desk and picked up his Employee of the Year trophy from last year. Heavy crystal, probably expensive. "Nice award. Must mean a lot to you." "Darren," Cambria warned. I set the trophy down hard enough to make both of them flinch. You called the cops on me, Cam. Tried to have me arrested for embezzlement. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. I pulled out my phone and played another audio recording, this one of Cambria talking to her sister about her plan to get rid of Darren by framing him for financial crimes. Technology's amazing these days. You can record anything. Porter's face went pale. Cambria, what is he talking about? You want to play games? I continued, ignoring Porter. Let's play games, but remember, I've been in the tech business for 15 years. I know how to find things people think they've hidden. I picked up Porter's phone from the desk and dropped it on the floor, then stepped on it. The screen cracked with a satisfying crunch. Oops, I said. Clumsy me. You can't just... Porter started. Call security, I interrupted. Please. I'd love to explain to them exactly why I'm here and what I've discovered about your professional relationship with my wife. Neither of them moved. That's what I thought. I headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Cambria? Next time you want to destroy someone's life, make sure you're not leaving a digital trail a mile wide. I'll be in touch. As I walked out, I heard Porter's voice, tight with panic. What the hell have you gotten us into? By 5 o'clock, Porter had suspended Cambria pending an internal investigation. By 6, she was home, pacing our living room like a caged animal. You think you're so smart, she said when I walked in, but you have no idea what you've started. I poured myself another whiskey and settled into my favorite chair. Actually, Cam, I think I have a pretty good idea, but please enlighten me. She stopped pacing and stared at me with pure hatred. I'm going to destroy you. You already tried that. How'd it work out? This isn't over. I raised my glass in a mock toast. You're absolutely right. We're just getting started. Eileen showed up at my shop the next morning with information I hadn't expected. She sat across from my desk, nervously twisting her wedding ring, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. I need to tell you something about Cambria, she said. I'm listening. She's been planning this for months, Darren. The thing with Porter, the stuff about you being boring, it's all been calculated. I leaned back in my chair. Why are you telling me this now? Because she threw me under the bus yesterday. Told HR that I was the one who recorded that conversation and leaked it. I could lose my job because of her lies. Interesting. Cambria was burning bridges faster than I'd anticipated. Eileen pulled out her phone. I have videos from the company retreat last month. Cambria got really intoxicated and started bragging about her affair. She said some pretty horrible things about you. Show me. The video was worse than I'd imagined. Cambria, clearly intoxicated, surrounded by co-workers, detailing intimate aspects of our marriage while everyone laughed. She called me pathetic and a placeholder until something better came along. The worst part was how much she seemed to enjoy humiliating me to people I'd considered friends. There's more, Eileen said. She's been using the company credit card for personal expenses, hotels, restaurants, gifts for Porter. Rachel in HR has been documenting everything, but she's been waiting for the right moment to act. Rachel Martinez was the HR director, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who'd never liked Cambria's attitude. If she was building a case, it meant Cambria's problems were bigger than a simple workplace gossip scandal. Why is Rachel helping? I asked. Because Porter's been harassing female employees for years, and Cambria's been covering for him. Rachel wants them both gone. This was better than I'd hoped. I wasn't just fighting a cheating wife. I was part of a larger effort to clean house at Keller Marketing. That afternoon, I made my first major move. Using my administrative access to their computer system, I transferred funds from Cambria's personal accounts to our joint account. Everything was legal, we were still married, and Texas community property laws gave me access to marital assets. But Cambria had been hiding money in accounts she thought I didn't know about. The transfer cleaned out her secret emergency fund, her girls' trip savings, and the account where she'd been stashing cash for her new life with Porter. In total, nearly $50,000 that she'd accumulated over 2 years of planning her exit strategy. When she discovered the transfers that evening, she went ballistic. "You can't just take my money." "Our money," I corrected. "Community property, remember? Everything earned during our marriage belongs to both of us." "That was for my future." "What future? The one where you run off with your boss and leave me with nothing?" She tried to call the bank, but I'd anticipated that move. I'd already spoken with our account manager and provided documentation showing the transfers were legal. Cambria could scream all she wanted, but the money was locked in joint accounts that required both our signatures to access. Meanwhile, Mason had been busy with his own assignment. He'd been monitoring Porter's social media accounts and had discovered that the man was incredibly vain about his possessions. His Instagram was full of photos of his expensive sports car, his mansion in Highland Park, and his collection of vintage watches. "Guy's got more ego than sense," Mason reported. "Posts his location constantly, shows off everything he owns, makes our job easier." That weekend, while Porter was hosting one of his famous dinner parties, Mason and I paid a visit to his estate. We didn't break in, that would have been illegal, but we did some creative landscaping in his driveway. Porter's pristine white Porsche got a new paint job, courtesy of several cans of washable spray paint. Nothing permanent, but it spelled out "Home Wrecker" in bright red letters across the hood and doors. We also filled his mailbox with pictures of him and Cambria from their secret rendezvous, along with printed copies of their text messages. The best part was that Porter's house had one of those video doorbells. Mason, being the tech expert he is, had hacked into the system and recorded our entire artistic endeavor. Then he uploaded the footage to the company's internal social media group with the caption, "When you mess with the wrong guy's wife." By Monday morning, the video had been shared dozens of times throughout the company. Porter arrived at work to find his employees snickering behind his back and his reputation in tatters. Cambria tried to do damage control, but it was too late. The video had spread beyond the company to their social circle. Friends were texting me congratulations and offering to buy me drinks. The tide of public opinion had shifted dramatically in my favor. But Cambria wasn't finished fighting. She hired a lawyer and tried to freeze our joint accounts, claiming I was hiding marital assets. The legal maneuver failed when my attorney provided documentation showing that I'd actually been more transparent about our finances than she had. Then she tried a different approach. She went to my biggest clients and told them I was mentally unstable and might damage their equipment. She suggested they take their business elsewhere for their own protection. That's when I realized my wife wasn't just unfaithful. She was genuinely vindictive. She was willing to destroy my livelihood out of spite, even though it would hurt her financially too. So I decided to show her what real vindictiveness looked like. I called Rachel Martinez and arranged a meeting. She arrived at my shop after hours, carrying a thick folder of documents. "I've been waiting for someone to take Porter down," she said without preamble. "He's been a problem for years, but he's always had protection from the board." "What kind of protection?" "His family owns 20% of the company's stock. But if he's involved in a scandal that damages the company's reputation, the board can force him out regardless of his ownership stake." She opened her folder and showed me documentation of Porter's behavior over the past 3 years. Harassment complaints that had been buried, company funds used for personal expenses, and a pattern of promoting women who slept with him while demoting those who refused his advances. "Cambria's been his accomplice in most of this," Rachel continued. "She's the one who's been intimidating the women who complained, telling them they'd lose their jobs if they pursued their grievances. Why haven't you acted before now?" "Because I needed someone on the outside to help expose them, someone who couldn't be fired or intimidated." I smiled. "Someone like a tech repair guy with a grudge and administrative access to their computer system." "Exactly." We spent the next hour planning our strategy. Rachel would handle the internal investigation while I provided technical support and evidence gathering. Mason would help with the more creative aspects of our campaign. By the time Rachel left, I had a complete picture of just how corrupt Cambria and Porter's relationship had become. They weren't just having an affair, they were running a systematic campaign of workplace harassment and financial manipulation. As I locked up the shop that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just reacting to their moves, I was setting the agenda. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you're winning, but you have no idea what's coming." I recognized Cambria's writing style, even though she was using a burner phone. She was planning something big, probably her final desperate attempt to destroy me before I could expose her completely. I texted back, "Bring it on, I've got nothing left to lose." But that wasn't true anymore. I was starting to win, and that gave me everything to fight for. Porter made his move on Tuesday morning. He called me directly, his voice trying to sound casual and friendly. "Darren, we need to talk, man to man." "I'm listening." "This thing between you and Cambria has gotten out of hand. People are getting hurt. Reputations are being damaged. Why don't we meet for lunch and work something out?" I almost laughed. After everything he'd done, Porter thought he could smooth things over with a friendly conversation. "Where did you have in mind?" "The club downtown, 1 o'clock. Just you and me." The club was Porter's territory, full of his business associates and social connections. He was trying to intimidate me by choosing familiar ground. What he didn't know was that I'd already anticipated this move. "I'll be there," I said, "but I'm bringing backup. This is supposed to be a private conversation. Nothing about my marriage has been private lately, thanks to you. See you at 1. I called Mason and Rachel, and we arrived at the club together. Porter was waiting at a corner table, looking confident in his expensive suit and gold watch. His expression changed when he saw I hadn't come alone. "I thought we agreed this would be just between us," he said as we sat down. "You thought wrong," I replied. "Rachel, you remember Porter, don't you? Your boss who's been using company resources to fund his affair with my wife?" Rachel opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "Mr. Keller, we need to discuss some irregularities in your expense reports." Porter's confidence cracked. "This isn't the place for business discussions." "Actually, it's the perfect place," I said. "All your friends can see how you handle adversity." Mason, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. "We've got video evidence of you and Cambria in company offices after hours, using corporate credit cards for personal expenses, and documented proof that you've been retaliating against employees who refused your advances. You can't prove any of that." I pulled out my phone and showed him a video file. Company security cameras are surprisingly high definition these days. This one shows you and Cambria in the conference room last month. Very unprofessional behavior. Porter's face went red. "You're blackmailing me." "I'm offering you a choice," I corrected. "You can admit publicly that Cambria violated company policy and deserves termination, or we can let HR handle this through official channels. Which do you think will be less embarrassing?" Rachel nodded. "The board meeting is scheduled for Friday. If this becomes an official investigation, everything will be on the record. Stock prices, company reputation, media attention, all of it becomes public." Porter looked around the dining room, noticing that other patrons were starting to watch our table. Several of them were probably his business associates, people who could make or break deals based on their opinion of his character. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Simple," I said. "Call a company-wide meeting this afternoon. Announce that Cambria Holloway has been terminated for violating workplace conduct policies. Take full responsibility for failing to maintain proper oversight of your employees. And if I do that, then we keep the more embarrassing evidence private. Your affair stays between us, and you get to keep your job. For now." Porter stared at his untouched salad for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made the call. 2 hours later, Cambria was officially unemployed. She arrived at my shop that evening in a rage unlike anything I'd ever seen. She stormed through the front door, ignoring the closed sign, and started screaming before she was fully inside. "You destroyed my career. 15 years of work, gone because you couldn't handle being a man." "Funny," I said, not looking up from my computer. "I thought Porter destroyed your career when he threw you under the bus to save himself. This is all your fault." "My fault? I'm not the one who decided to have an affair with my boss and harass coworkers who got in my way." She grabbed a wrench from my workbench and threw it at the wall. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I still have options." "Like what? Your secret bank accounts are frozen, your lover just publicly humiliated you, and your reputation is ruined. What options do you have left?" "I have friends, people who owe me favors." "You mean the same friends who've been texting me congratulations all week? The ones who always thought you were a social climber but were too polite to say anything?" That hit home. Cambria's face went pale as she realized how isolated she'd become. "I can still hurt you," she said quietly. "You already tried. Remember the embezzlement accusation? How'd that work out?" "I'm not talking about legal trouble." Something in her tone made me look up from my computer. She was smiling, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "What are you planning, Cam? You'll find out soon enough." She left without another word, but her threat hung in the air like smoke. I called Mason and asked him to keep an eye on the shop overnight. If Cambria was planning something vindictive, I wanted to be ready. The next morning, I discovered what she'd meant. My mother called at 7 a.m., crying. "Darren, honey, I'm so sorry about your troubles. I had no idea things were so bad between you and Cambria." "Mom, what are you talking about?" "She came by yesterday evening, told me all about your problems, how you've been drinking heavily and making threats. She seemed so worried about you." My heart sank. Cambria was poisoning my family relationships, trying to isolate me from my support system. "Mom, whatever she told you, she showed me pictures, honey, of the damage you did to that man's car, the threatening messages you sent. She's afraid you might hurt yourself." Pictures. Cambria had been documenting my revenge campaign, probably planning to use the evidence against me later. She was smarter than I'd given her credit for. "Mom, I need you to listen to me carefully. Cambria has been lying to you." But the damage was done. Over the next few hours, I received similar calls from my sister, my uncle, and several family friends. Cambria had spent the previous day visiting everyone in my family, playing the role of the concerned wife worried about her husband's mental health. It was a masterful move. Even if I could prove she was lying, the doubt would remain. Family relationships are built on trust, and she'd poisoned that trust with carefully crafted half-truths. I was still processing this development when Rachel called with more bad news. "Porter's fighting back," she said. "He's hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on you, claims you've been stalking him and vandalizing his property." "Can he prove that?" "The video you posted shows you spray painting his car. That's technically vandalism, even if the paint was washable." I realized I'd made a tactical error. In my eagerness to humiliate Porter, I'd given him ammunition to use against me. "What do you recommend?" "We need to move faster. The board meeting is tomorrow, and if Porter can convince them that you're the real problem, they might side with him despite the evidence of his misconduct." "What do you need from me?" "Everything you have. Every email, every recording, every piece of evidence that shows their pattern of behavior. We're going to bury them in documentation they can't explain away." I spent the rest of the day preparing files while Mason handled the shop. By evening, we had assembled a comprehensive case that painted Porter and Cambria as workplace predators who'd been systematically abusing their positions for years. But as I reviewed the evidence, I realized we were missing something important. All of our proof showed what they'd done, but not why they'd done it. We had documentation of their affair and their workplace misconduct, but we didn't have their motive for targeting me specifically. That's when I found the email buried deep in Cambria's archived messages. It was addressed to her sister and dated 6 months ago, right around the time her behavior toward me had started changing. Porter says the company is going to go public next year. If I can get rid of Darren and marry Porter before the IPO, I'll be set for life. The divorce settlement will be nothing compared to what I'll gain as Porter's wife when the stock goes public. Everything clicked into place. This wasn't just about an affair or workplace harassment. Cambria had been planning to use me as a stepping stone to greater wealth and social status. She'd calculated that destroying our marriage would be worth it if it meant securing a place in Porter's future fortune. But her plan had a fatal flaw. She'd assumed I'd be a passive victim who would quietly accept whatever she chose to do to me. Tomorrow's board meeting would prove just how wrong she'd been. The boardroom at Keller Marketing was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of downtown Dallas, while the massive mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. Oil paintings of the company's founders stared down from the walls like disapproving ancestors. I wasn't supposed to be there. Rachel had tipped me off about Cambria's desperate plan to crash the board meeting and plead her case, painting herself as the victim of her unstable ex-husband's vendetta. She'd somehow convinced 2 board members to let her present her side of the story before they voted on Porter's future with the company. Mason and I arrived early and positioned ourselves in the hallway outside the boardroom. Through the glass doors, we could see Porter pacing nervously while board members reviewed documents. He looked like a man who knew his career was hanging by a thread. At exactly 10 a.m., Cambria arrived. She'd dressed for the occasion in a conservative navy suit that made her look professional and trustworthy. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she still had cards to play. She swept past us without acknowledgement and knocked on the boardroom door. One of the board members let her in, and we could hear her voice through the glass, though we couldn't make out specific words. "She's good," Mason observed. "Look at their faces." He was right. Through the transparent walls, we could see that Cambria was winning over her audience. She gestured emphatically, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Several board members were nodding sympathetically. "Time to crash the party," I said. I pushed through the boardroom doors with Mason right behind me. The conversation stopped immediately. "Excuse me," said the board chairman, a distinguished man in his 60s. "This is a private meeting. Mr. Harrison, I'm Darren Halloway. I believe my wife has been telling you about me." Cambria's face went white. "You can't be here. Security!" "Actually," Rachel said, entering behind us, "Mr. Halloway has every right to be here. As the person making accusations against him, Mrs. Halloway opened the door for rebuttal testimony." Rachel had been busy. She'd researched corporate law and found a precedent that allowed me to respond to accusations made in a board setting. It was a technical loophole, but it was enough to get me into the room. "This is highly irregular," Porter protested. "So is having an affair with an employee and using company resources to fund it," I replied. "But here we are." I pulled out my tablet and connected it to the room's presentation system. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to show you some evidence that puts Mrs. Halloway's accusations in perspective." The first video was from the company security cameras, showing Cambria and Porter in his office after hours. The timestamp proved it was during a period when Porter had claimed to be working late on quarterly reports. "This is private," Cambria shouted. "Not when it's recorded on company equipment in company facilities," Rachel corrected. "Everything captured by our security system belongs to the corporation." The next piece of evidence was the email where Cambria had outlined her plan to divorce me and marry Porter for financial gain. Several board members shifted uncomfortably as they read her calculating description of how to maximize her benefit from the company's upcoming public offering. "Mrs. Halloway," said the chairman, "is this your email address?" Cambria's lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she ignored him. "That email was taken out of context." "What context makes it acceptable to plan your husband's financial destruction for personal gain?" asked another board member. I played the final piece of evidence, a recording of Cambria and Porter discussing their plan to frame me for embezzlement to remove me as an obstacle to their relationship. It was from a conversation they'd had in Porter's car, not realizing that his vehicle's hands-free system was recording everything to the company's fleet management database. The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other, demanding explanations from Porter and Cambria. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "This is a setup," Porter shouted over the noise. "He's been stalking us, gathering evidence illegally." "Actually," I said, "everything I've shown you was obtained legally through systems I helped design for this company. Your own security cameras, your own fleet management system, your own email servers. I didn't hack anything. I just knew where to look." Cambria made one last desperate move. She stood up and pointed at me dramatically. "He's dangerous. He vandalized Porter's car. He's been harassing our friends. He's unstable." "You're right," I said calmly. "I did spray paint Porter's car, with washable paint that came off with soap and water. And yes, I've been gathering evidence of your affair and workplace misconduct. But unstable. Let's talk about who's really unstable here." I played a video that Mason had secretly recorded the previous evening. It showed Cambria throwing rocks at my shop windows while screaming threats. The timestamp proved it had happened after she'd finished her tour of my family members, spreading lies about my mental health. "This was taken last night," I announced, after Mrs. Halloway spent the day telling my family that I was dangerous and unstable. She decided to prove her point by committing actual vandalism against my business. The boardroom fell silent. Cambria stared at the screen in shock, realizing that her own behavior had been documented and used against her. "The question isn't whether I'm angry," I continued. "The question is whether my anger is justified. My wife had an affair with her boss, used company resources to fund their relationship, planned to frame me for embezzlement, and systematically tried to destroy my reputation and relationships. Yes, I fought back. But everything I did was legal, while everything they did violated company policy, employment law, and basic human decency." The chairman looked at Porter. "Mr. Keller, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Porter's shoulders sagged. He looked around the room at faces that had once respected him, now filled with disgust and disappointment. "I resign," he said quietly. "That's not enough," said another board member. "We need to discuss criminal charges and civil liability." As the board members began discussing next steps, Cambria made a final, desperate play. She lunged toward my tablet, trying to grab it and destroy the evidence, but Mason was ready for her. He stepped between us, and Cambria bounced off his solid frame like she'd hit a wall. The impact sent her stumbling backward, and she crashed into the conference table, scattering papers and water glasses. The room erupted in chaos as board members jumped up to avoid the mess. "Get her out of here," the chairman ordered. Security guards appeared and escorted Cambria from the room, but not before she screamed one final threat. "This isn't over, Darren. I'll make you pay for this." Porter followed her out, his career and reputation in ruins. As the boardroom door closed behind them, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't experienced in months. "Mr. Halloway," the chairman said, "the board owes you an apology. We had no idea this kind of behavior was happening in our company." "Thank you, sir. I just wanted the truth to come out." Rachel smiled at me. "The company will be conducting a full investigation into workplace harassment and misconduct. We'll also be implementing new policies to prevent this kind of abuse in the future." As Mason and I walked out of the building, I could see Porter and Cambria arguing on the sidewalk below. Their perfect plan had collapsed, taking their careers, reputations, and relationship with it. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but we still have options." I showed the message to Mason, who laughed. "What options? They're both unemployed, their reputations are destroyed, and everyone knows what they did." "You're right," I said, deleting the message. "They've got nothing left to threaten me with." As we walked toward my truck, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of betrayal and humiliation that had been crushing me for months was finally gone. I'd fought back against people who thought I was weak, and I'd won. Behind us, I could hear Cambria's voice getting more shrill as she realized the full scope of her losses. Porter was walking away from her, apparently deciding that a disgraced former employee wasn't worth defending anymore. "So what now?" Mason asked as we reached the parking garage. I thought about it for a moment. My marriage was over, but my business was thriving. My reputation was restored, and my enemies were defeated. For the first time in years, I had complete control over my own future. "Now," I said, starting the truck, "now I get back to living my life on my own terms." As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of Cambria in the rearview mirror, standing alone on the sidewalk, holding her phone like she was trying to call someone who would never answer. "You wanted excitement, Cam? You got it. But next time you decide to play games with someone's life, make sure you're better at it than they are."